We are delighted that you're joining us for another podcast of Wake Up Aligned, and it is the podcast for chiropractors, where we get to talk about chiropractic lifestyle, and topics of interest. You can contact us through our email, and that is mailbag@amcfamily.com.
Welcome back to another episode of your podcast, Wake Up Aligned. We do this just for you, the chiropractor. Hope you know that Dr. McMurtry, I should say, and myself, Tom Owen, our hearts are here in hopes that we can empower, inspire, and motivate chiropractors. We have a love for chiropractic. That's absolutely the case. But our heart burns and passionately for chiropractors, because it takes a different level of sacrifice, a different level of commitment to even decide to be a chiropractor. So, we want to feed that as much as we can. We love chiropractic, and we are passionately about transforming chiropractors' lives. So with that, let's get to another show. I got a special guest in the studio with us today, Snacks, producer. We've got Dr. Tim Peterson joining me today. For those of you that don't know Dr. Tim, he and I go way back. I'll probably hear a little bit about that history today, but he's also inside of the Aligned family. He's the Certified Training Center Director. He heads up the whole program, and that's a lot to take on, and I'm sure he'll speak to that as well. Dr. Tim, you want to say hello to everybody?
Hello, and thanks for having me here, Tom.
Well, I'm very appreciative and thankful that you're here, and I think everyone else is going to be thankful that you joined us for the day. But before we get going too far into this, I always like to start out with some shout outs to the Aligned family. So for those of you that aren't Aligned AMC family members, you're going to have to bear with me for a second while I brag on these folks. But just a couple real quick. One of them is Doctors Kyle and Savannah Lorenz, two of my friends for a long time out in Cheyenne, Wyoming, are going to eclipse the $2 million mark this year. If you knew the story, in fact, I can tell a little bit about them. They're not here, so I can pick on them a little bit, right? But I do remember that when they started, Dr. Kyle, if I remember correctly, Dr. Kyle was working at Home Depot. Could be wrong about that, but it seems to me like somewhere in there, Home Depot was involved. But they were scraping by to get by when they first came on. So to go from there, right, and just have the practice of their dreams, and to be such good people I genuinely love and care about, I'm really thrilled to say that, and I'm proud of them. $2 million.
I'd also heard that not too long ago, they actually bought the apartment complex that they had been living in when they were struggling so much.
That I do believe I understand that as well. They've bought, I think they built an enormous commercial sized building with their practices in, and then I think they're multi-tenant landlords there. I might be wrong about that, but I do know that they definitely built their practice building of their dreams. And I think they also, not one too long ago, that they bought their house on a hill kind of dream home. So obviously they're doing a lot of things right. But what the great thing is it hasn't changed them, right? Money does not make you happy. It only makes misery more tolerable. Just so happens that they're good and happy, solid charactered people from the get-go, and I love them. So I'm proud of them. Another one that I get to brag on is right here in the studio with me. Dr. Tim, I understand that you've got a long history. In fact, that might be somewhere we could just unpack the show today, because there's a lot of lessons to be learned from your whole experience, your story.
For sure.
Right? But this year, you're on pace to crack the $1 million mark. Is that right?
Yes, we are.
All right. Well, all right. So dinner in January is on you.
I guess so, right?
Deal. I'll take it. Snacks, you heard that, right? I'll get you in on that with me, Snacks. So we'll get us a good steak dinner here in Atlanta next time. So with that, folks, let's jump in. I think that's a good place to start. you've got a very unique story. You're a second generation chiropractor,
Sure am.
right? And, I think we date back, me and you knowing each other
2005.
2005. So we're 18 years into that journey. And why don't we just start there? What was life like I guess not before AMC because you were there, but we came up to a point to where we did something that I want to unpack on today's show called a hard reset.
Right.
And people are like, well, what necessarily is a hard reset? Well, we'll talk about that shortly. Let's look behind the scenes first and see if there's anything that other people out there listening would resonate with. So what do you want to talk about on before the hard reset was ever even mentioned to you?
Yeah, I guess even before I knew of AMC, when I graduated in 95, I had my first child 2 weeks before I graduated. So I hadn't really given a whole lot of thought what I was going to do from there. So I didn't get off on quite the right foot, so to speak. And by the time I came to Austin in 1997 and I was practicing with my father and just struggled, I didn't have a system. I just went in debt, got in trouble, even with the IRS over time, because I wasn't even able to pay my taxes. I was struggling in practice for about 10 years and only got to start with AMC in 2005 when I was already going bankrupt, losing my home, and was not able to pull out of it. Ended up having to lose my practice in Austin and go to Amarillo as an associate for about a year and a half, where my marriage came apart. And so here it was, the end of 2007, and I came back down to San Antonio and practiced with my dad. I lived in my parents' house over the garage, and he was paying me what he could because he didn't need an associate at that time. But he was with AMC, and that's when I started going regularly to AMC and installed the system. And we did okay, but never thrived and really ended up kind of tailing off. So between 2007 and 2014, we got to the point in August of 2014 where my dad said, if we don't grow, I'm going to have to let you go. And he was like, you could tell it was devastating him. He didn't want to fire his son, but he couldn't afford to keep on paying me. And so me and my brother and sister went to an AMC in Dallas and talked to you.
Yeah, I remember that.
And before that, when I was struggling all that time, as a chiropractor, I've thrown papers, I've worked in a deli, I've done landscaping, I cleaned the office for money from my dad. So I've done everything I could to try to make ends meet. And so
as a chiropractor,
while I was practicing, so I was like, I don't know anything else other than chiropractic. And I was a good chiropractor. I just wasn't succeeding. I didn't know why, because I knew the system very, very well. And so when we talked to you, that's when you talked to us about a hard reset. I didn't even know what that meant. But what I came to realize is that a hard reset is like erasing your whole hard drive and installing the software again and installing it the right way. So the way I installed it last time was that this was a bunch of procedures that you had to put together. In fact, I passed a lot of the certification tests for doing different procedures, but I didn't realize I needed to get out of my way, that it wasn't about me, that it was about loving the patients, and that if I was uncomfortable, too bad, it needed to be done. And so what we did is we reinstalled the system. We went back to the office evaluation. We went back to the very initial recordings, the go-getter, the made-up mind, success in your daily routine, all those type of things to get your mind right. And then we started installing the system within that mindset. And so that was in August of 2014, and I was on the verge of being let go. My dad said by October, I would probably be gone. But when we got to 2015, we grew over $100,000 over 2014. And then the next year, 2016 and 2017, we grew over $100,000 a year each year of those first 3 years. So we had obviously done a hard reset.
And I remember that. I mean, obviously, I remember sitting in the lobby over there in the back right corner of that lobby on those couches past the elevator bank. I remember exactly where we were and what we were dealing with. And I'd been along for some of that journey. I remember you and your dad coming to the Chattanooga office at some
Actually,
point.
he sent me by myself, and I sat down with you, with Dr. Oz, and then I even went to lunch with your dad. And yeah, y'all couldn't quite drill through my skull quite enough back then.
You had it was more like a steel plate.
Yeah, I had to
in that skull. We weren't getting through to that because there's a when you talk about a hard reset, it's like you said, it's like clearing the down to the basis, the operating system
right.
of the hard drive, and but it also relates with something that we teach at AMC called the Coke can, right?
Right.
And the Coke can, when you look at a Coke can, if I put a Coca-Cola can on this table here with us, and I said, "What is that, Dr. Tim?" And you're going to tell me, "Well, it's a can of Coke." And well, it says it's a can of Coke, right? And you had doctor in front of your name back then, but I wouldn't necessarily said that you were a successful branded chiropractor, right? No, that can of Coke boils down to, it doesn't matter what's on the label, it's what you've allowed to be put in it.
Well, and if I can add to that,
Sure.
You got to dump out that Coke can to fill it up with what you want to put in.
Exactly. Well,
right?
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
But up to that point,
Yeah.
You were wrapped with the Coke can label,
Right.
but until you, see, that's the difference between that Coke can. The Coke can, do you pick it up and pour it out, right? And if it's your Coke can, that's your Coke can. It's over on your side of the table. I can't reach across there and touch that. That's your Coke can.
Right.
You decide when you're going to empty it out. Or are you just going to, no, I'll just keep it the way it is. It's a little bitter.
But I'm comfortable with that.
I've gotten used to it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I've gotten used to drinking this stale, flat Coke. Anybody's ever drank a stale, flat Coke, you know what I mean? It's not, but if you're thirsty enough and it's all you've got in the house, you'll probably get used to it.
Yeah.
Right. That's what we were talking about. So that day when we talked about a hard reset, I said, Dr. Tim, I've exhausted all efforts. It's not procedural, right? There's an old formula that's always worked. It will always work because it's based in principle. But it says if you get your attitude, your action, your concepts, and your procedures right, it's very, very hard to fail in business, much less chiropractic. But in chiropractic, it never fails, right? Attitude, action, concepts, procedures. Well, you already said on the show already, you said, well, I could pass your certification of the procedures.
Right.
There's other 3 parts there to it. And yours, and I couldn't do that sitting there. I couldn't look inside your head and figure out, how did he get those crazy concepts? How did he get those convoluted ideas? Why does he have this attitude, right? Because back when you said you flew to Chattanooga and met with even my father,
Right.
back then, well, you didn't have the attitude of humility of necessarily saying, you know what, I'm a vessel, let's clean it out, let's start over.
Right.
So sitting there doing that hard reset, and if anybody's listening going, that sounds like something I need to do, well, fine, that's good. But when we reset it, it might not be the same thing that has to change in the listener as it was with you.
Absolutely.
That's what a hard reset does. Is I don't know. It's kind of like I'll change the imagery for the listener. There's no reason to put a second and third floor on your structure if we know we can see that the structure won't support it, right? There's no reason to start. Let's not try to build on top of it. Somewhere structurally, we've got issues, but we haven't been able to figure out, well, where is the cracks in the foundation, right? There's only one way to do that. Sometimes you have to tear all the timber down. You have to take all the lumber down, take all the studs down. And then sometimes the foundation is so whacked, you literally have to break up the concrete, start all over and lay new footers, and then you start building up. And then guess what? If you build the foundation deep enough and wide enough and strong enough, guess what? You start building on it. And that's
right.
That's kind of what a hard reset is to me, because sometimes you just get to a point of it's time to draw a line in the sand. And Tim, back then that day, I'm not going to convince you anymore. I can't sell you on this. You either want to do this or you don't, and I'm not going to sit here and try to convince you to do it.
Right.
And I told him, by the way, it's called hard reset. Hard resets are not fun.
Hard work, a lot of work.
Yeah.
I would say also, I had to get in my mind congruent with each step that I was doing in the procedures. So some of them made a lot of sense to me and I had a lot of conviction behind them. But until you have a conviction of why am I doing this? I'll give you an example. Obviously our office operates a lot on referrals, but I used to think when I was asking patients for referrals that they were thinking that I was trying to get more business. And I think in my mind, I probably was, right?
But that was a concept.
Exactly. That was my concept. I was also desperate for patients. And so once I realized, you know what, I am asking them because I want to help them to help others. And so when that is truly in your heart, then patients obviously want to help others. And if you're just trying to help figure out how you can help them help others, it's not confrontational anymore. It's not stepping on people's toes. And so that became a much stronger, much more powerful part of our practice because the concept changed.
Authenticity cannot be faked.
Right.
Right. And it's so easy for me to sit here in the studio and talk and say the best way in the service industry is it's not about you. It's about the patient.
Right.
And a lot of people say that. Say, well, I just want to help a lot of people sick people get well, and I want to treat my patients and love all my patients. But why are you doing it? What's the objective? And until you can get down to that level of authenticity that you changed it, sometime that there was a shift, because prior to the hard reset, you were trying anything and everything. There was hardly anything you didn't try, but it was all about who?
It was about me and my insecurities and what people thought of me.
Exactly. And I remember Dr. Ed Rack, the first time he ever came to, do you know Ed, Dr. Ed?
Yes, I do.
Dr. Ed came, I remember, I think it was San Diego, if I remember. We were doing a boot camp out there, and I think it was an issue on his reevaluations, and he had never been able to do that, and he couldn't get, if I'm not mistaken, I think couldn't get people to come to POCs. It was either the reevaluations or POCs. I don't remember that part of the story, but he struggled with it. He struggled with it. And I'm like, Ed, that's easy. It's not about you. And from that day forward, that was, again, about the same amount of time, about 18 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, whatever it was, he's never had that issue again.
Imagine that.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
Wait a minute. You think about that. That guy's been in practice how many, at least a decade? At least a decade? And he's never been able to get people to come to POC, and he can't do the reevaluations because he's scared of what they might think or say about the cost of it, or he might be afraid that you weren't going to see any change, or whatever the issue might be. And then all of a sudden, he's never had the problem again. See, that's what I mean when we say attitude, action, concepts, procedures. And of those 4, if I had to pick, and I don't have to, but if I had to, I would pick 2 of those 4. So I just want 50% of them. Give me 50% of them, and the other ones will take care of themselves. That is attitude, because I can't fight your attitude. If you don't have an attitude of willing to do whatever it takes, which is the winning attitude, right? Your attitude, my kid's attitude, right? Your kid's attitude, we both know it's not going to go any further than the attitude that you provide and you bring to it. But the second one, which is equally as strong, as concepts.
Right.
Right. And if your concept is everything I'm doing, and you might not even innately know that you're doing it, you might not even be, consciously that you're taking steps and actions in a self-based position. In other words, if you say I, If everything starts with I or yeah, but, if I ask you to, or I suggest or advise, or from a certified training center, because I want to talk about that on this show, if we're giving instruction and somebody responds to me with either the letter I or word I or yeah, but, it's self-based.
Right.
It's automatically something that you're not comfortable with, you don't want to do. I didn't say that's what you wanted to do. It's what you needed to do. And it's not what you want the patient to do. It's what the patient needs to do. Right? It's a shift in concept and an understanding.
Yeah, I would say, hard resets started end of August. We had a home and garden show in October, and there was starting to be a different feel in our practice, but we were doing a home and garden show, spinal screening, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And on Friday, we got one patient scheduled. And me and my brother were down there all day long, and we're walking out going, this is frustrating. We want to help people.
Be honest, you were irritated. You're tired.
A lot of time. You spend a lot of money on those.
All this time and all this effort, and all we get is one new patient.
But then I remember we both stopped kind of at the same time and said, you know what? But that lady really needs us. Terrible fibromyalgia, just almost crippled. And we said, if that is the one patient we get this entire weekend, then it was worth it. And so our mindset changed. And we came back Saturday and Sunday, and I can't remember, it was quite a few years ago, but we got right around 30 new patients for that weekend. And from that point on, I think that concept changed, that it's not about us. It's about the ones that God puts in front of us, because those are the ones that we can help.
I think you told me sometime earlier that, from that day forward, if and when you did screenings, health talks, or whatever that was, that your concept, your attitude shifted from, I'm here to book new patients, chase new patients. You want to get screened. You were walking around working the crowd.
Yeah, we'd like to get checked. We'd like to get checked. Would you like to get checked? And from that point forward, we never asked anybody ever again. We didn't ask anybody if they wanted to come into our booth. We would stand there with open hearts and open arms, and people would walk up to us and say, can you help me? And then we would just have a conversation. And if I thought we could potentially help them, then we'd give them the offer to come in and get checked.
You're always going to be more effective, and I hate to use this because I hate this word, sales, right? There is a power from going the position of chasing and pursuing to receiving.
Right.
Right. But it came from a different change in your concept, your attitude. I can't talk about that enough, folks.
Right.
It's not the procedures. If success was tied up in scripting, every chiropractor in America, in the United States, would be successful. If it was tied up in your procedures, are your procedures important? Do they, and how you do them and effectively? Absolutely, they're important. But if success was tied up in a protocol or a script, you can buy that stuff online.
Yeah, I've been with the AMC 18 years. I'm not that dense that I haven't learned the procedures yet. I'm still coming to these summits, or they used to be called boot camps back then, because I want to stay tied into the source, because I know how we can drift, and we're not going to let that happen.
Well, there's another concept. Rule of life is never unplug from the source. So many people get to that point of comfortable, and they, especially inside of AMC, they're so stuck on that procedure component, right? You spent how many years with AMC, and all you were ever doing was you were really focused on mastering the procedures.
Yeah, it's about 7 years.
So 7 years of just working on the procedures. But at some point you decided to go sub-level. You learn the depths of the basic subconscious, the material that goes into the why. Well, and you never opened up to learn why, because your Coke can was already full. That's another thing we haven't even talked about, right? You get so much junk in there, and your filter gets so clogged, it won't let you put anything else in.
Right.
It's like a good, tell my countryside out here, it's like a farm pond. It's a spring-fed farm pond, and it flows in, flows out, and it's good, clean, filtered water coming in. That pond is going to have very little algae. It's going to have very little junk. It's going to be almost drinking material, right?
Right.
But if you don't have the clean and you have dirty water filtering in, and you don't, and the back end is clogged and it's not flowing out, what's going to happen?
It's going to be brackish.
It's going to be brackish. It's going to be pretty nasty, right?
Yeah.
It could even get a stink to it.
Yeah.
That's where the word stinking thinking comes from. It's putrid from the standpoint of you can't outgrow that attitude and that concept
Right.
that's brought to it. Let's shift gears. What made you want to be a certified training center director?
Well, when we were going through the hard reset, we had gone to a couple of different training centers, and it was before they were certified. So we were going to different successful chiropractors, but they weren't all really doing a whole lot of the AMC system. They were doing it, but it was more personality and charisma based. And so those training centers ended up being a little bit kind of frustrating. And so as we were starting to be successful, I think, so Dr. Clint Brockles started the certified training center because he wanted the training centers to be really, truly following the AMC system as a whole. And so I don't even remember what year that was, but it was around 2016, 2017 when he started this up. And he asked us if we would like to become the first certified training center after himself. And so he came down and certified us. And so we started seeing different visits of people. And I noticed every time that I knew someone was coming to our office to visit, I would raise my game. So when you're teaching something, you're going to raise your game. And so we can continue to grow even more, I think, because we were certified training centers. But then we would get reports back from these offices, how much a difference it made in their lives, that they were able to observe this, that, and the other thing. Because at the boot camps or summits, you're seeing these different pieces, but you don't realize how it fits together. Like you talk about, Tom, like a puzzle. And if you're just missing that one piece, that's what people see. And so a lot of times people are missing this piece, that piece, or they don't know how to put them together so they work effectively. So when you can actually see it in a day-long visit to a chiropractor's office that does the system, I think there's a lot of aha moments.
Well, first of all, it's just hard to get certified in the first place. I mean, it's so deep, it's so wide, there's so much to the system, right?
Correct. Yeah.
We were talking just last night, myself, I was in a different meeting with AMC directors, and we had to revisit a fact that you're kidding yourself. Everybody inside of Align, and I'm talking to the Align members for a moment here, you are kidding yourself. There is no way under God's green, or on God's green earth, that you could possibly master the entire AMC system in anything less than 5 to 7 years.
Yeah.
Right?
Correct.
And you got people taking test drives for it for 2 or 3 years, and they go, well, I got it. I got everything AMC had to offer. You and I know from a standpoint of, you haven't even gotten to you're still operating up on the surface level, and you probably never even mastered the staff.
Right.
You probably never mastered your leadership skills and the development, all those components, because there's so much to it. But
you can cover all of it very shallow, but it's so deep.
Yeah.
There's layer after layer after layer.
And that's a part of that certified training center that's so powerful. Again, it's such an asset, because you can only, I always said the brain can absorb as much as the butt can endure.
Right.
Right. You can only sit in so many classes, and you're only going to really pay attention when you're listening to an audio. There's only so much attention span we have. There's just something very powerful about seeing the sermon in action rather than always hearing it.
Right.
And that's the power of a certified training center. It gets you off your island. That's another one. I'm working with a doctor right now that comes from a background of just inundated, came out of school, which we've talked about many times before. You come out of school, listen, students, you happen to be a student there listening today, pay attention to what I'm saying. You better be very, very careful when you come out of school as to who you hang out with that first 6 months. You're like a sponge and you're going to soak it in. And we talk about concepts, we talk about the Coke can. I'm telling you, whatever those concepts you take in as truth, this is the way it is, this is the model, this is the component, this is the way practice works, this is what you can expect, this is how, you can only be so successful at a certain level, and it takes you 5 years to hit profit. All those crazy concepts, you get all kinds of what the model's like and what practice is like in those first 6 months. Then you spend the next 20 years trying to get rid of them, right? So I'm working with a young lady right now that very similar, come out very, very passionate about chiropractic. No question about her identity. No question about her value. She has high values of chiropractic. No issues there. But she got inundated with that pain model, high volume, open adjusting. I could care less about the open adjusting component of that. But that pain model, right? And just doesn't understand. Anyway, I started working with her, and she is a go-getter. She is a sponge that's willing to squeeze that sponge and get that stuff out and replace it with something that's sustainable. That's what I keep talking to her about. I'm like, you know what? I've been around this profession for, my whole life, and I'm in my 50s, well into my 50s now. My dad goes back, the Owen family and chiropractic goes back to 1955, right? All those times, it's the same thing. So everybody thinks chiropractic keeps changing and getting better, and, we're evolving. You keep repeating history, right? You come up with a new name on it, you put a new sticker on it, but it's still the same thing. There's always been volume practicing. And there's a law that says there's old pilots and there's bold pilots, but there are no old, bold pilots. There's old practitioners and there's volume practitioners, but there's no old volume practitioners. And you can ask the gurus of that, and they'll agree, and they'll go, yeah, you're absolutely right. You either burn out or die.
Right.
Die too young. There's a fact to it. So what I'm teaching her is that, there is a way to have a sustainable, long-term, enjoyable, low-stress, high referral practice of your dreams, keeping the overhead in check and being as profitable as you want to. And there you are. We on this show, we've talked about you grew 100,000 year over year, 100,000, another 100,000. Your overhead wasn't keeping up with that, was it?
Not really. No.
Because when the model's correct, we can grow the gross revenue, but we should be able to grow that gross revenue without raising the overhead much. Obviously you're going to have staffing that you might add, but still, if you can add 100,000 and spend 100,000 a year and spend 15,000 to do it, I think that's a pretty good return of investment. But back to it, with that lady, that young doctor, she's on an island, and that's the term I used a minute ago. Sometimes you just got to get them off the island, because she's in that practice. It's a young practice, newer practice, and she's hearing all this. She's getting the teaching. She's hearing the audios, the videos, but she's got all those old concepts. So it's like a lot of spiders running around in her head, right?
Right.
And I've got her, look, you're going to go see this. I said, it's not a certified training center. It's another thing that you can speak to this, because this is your department, but it's one of your on fire training centers. And I just said, look, you just got to get down there and just see some of this in action. see what's possible. Let's get it in there as to how efficient it looks, and look how smooth it is. And I'm just making her do that every week. It's a 2-hour drive. She's going every week. So if you want to know, she's going to see Dr. Dan Yachter.
Cool.
So, but anyway, I kind of gotten on a sidetrack here.
Yeah. Well, you touched on something that I do want to address, because I think sometimes people that when they're starting with AMC, they're like, well, yeah, he can do it or she can do it, but I don't know if I can. And that's part of the training center as well. And again, yeah, I'm a pretty reserved guy. I'm not a big connector with people. And I wanted people to realize that you can be successful without having to be a big personality. You know, the way I'm successful in my practice is going to look different than the way somebody else is, because your own personality is going to be injected into it. So I want people to be able to come to a training center and see that, wow, if he can do it, I can do it. So it's not from the perspective of, oh, he's a dynamo. No wonder he's a Sisyphus, he's a dynamo. No wonder he can do it. It should be your heart's in the right place. So God's leading you to that success.
All right. So you're the director of certified training.
Correct.
Okay. Centers, which means you're a master of the system.
Right.
But you have a long history of knowing what it's like to practice in the system without results. And now you understand what it's like to practice in a system with results. So if you were going to, in your own words, and for somebody to take something out of this week's episode and say, all right, well, what was the one thing? What's the one thing that I've got to shift that made the difference? Because obviously you're still operating in the same system. So where does somebody go? What's the one factor? What's the 3 factors?
I think the one factor to me is very simple. It's every procedure you are thinking, why is this the best thing for the patient? For example, missed visits. Obviously, they inconvenience the office, but why is a patient missing visits bad for them? Right. So every procedure we put through the filter of why is this important for the patient?
Is there another one?
I think that's
How about
that's my
conceptually
filter.
for you? I mean, was that it? But that was in the whole hard reset process. We got rid of a bunch of junk that was inside that thick head of yours we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
That was the big shift.
Right. Because I would think, well, what's the patient going to think if I make them make this visit up? Right. Or what's that patient going to think if I ask for a referral? But why is this best for the patient? So just flipping that whole thing allowed me, we require the spouse to be at the decision-making report, the R2, the second report. And I had to get my mind around, well, why is that the best for the patient? Once I came up with the reasons why that was important and I could clearly state that to the patient, it was no longer a problem.
No longer a problem for you internally.
Correct.
Which means it was not a problem with the patient.
Right. It was a problem with me.
Right.
Yeah. Because they didn't know why.
Right. And once the why was in place, same system, didn't shift a whole lot in what you were saying. So
yeah, just nuances.
So for somebody listening, I mean, I'm just taking somebody going, all right, if I can just shift that concept, right? Because that's what I said, attitude, action, concepts, procedures. And you just made a mind shift of conceptually of everything that you did and operated on was going to be based on what was best for the patient. What statistically took place in and you just named a bunch of, let's go through some stats, some of the very most common stats. What happened to your closing ratio?
Closing ratio, surprisingly, has always stayed kind of similar. And it's only recently, I continue to work on it. This year, it's increased another 5 or 6 points. So it's been something I've beat my head up against.
Well, what is it?
It's, right now it's 61%.
61%.
We've been as low as 40% before.
Mm-hmm. But 61%, and you're still growing 100,000 year over year.
Right.
All right. So what was your missed appointment percentage? What shifted on that?
You know,
I might be throwing numbers
Yeah.
at you, and you weren't prepared for that. But
yeah, I missed appointments. We generally go by, if a patient's care plan is 40 visits over 12 months, did they get those 40 visits in? And if they've continued with care, they're going to have come to all those appointments.
the reason I'm asking this, Dr.
Yeah.
Tim, there's a method to my madness, is what statistically changed. In other words, when people outside of the Align family and they hear some guy all of a sudden who's growing 100,000 this year, he grew another 100,000 the next year, grew another 100,000 the next year. Look, I've been working with chiropractors for 40 years, kind of telling my age there, but they're automatically going to one of two things, right? They don't understand, how could you possibly grow that much year over year over year? See, that's called consistent growth. Anybody can spike, and then what happens? They fall back down. The system won't support it. Then they spike again, and then the system won't support it. That's called roller coaster practicing. And you talk about frustration, but consistent growth, 100,000, 100,000, 100,000. For them to compute, the average listener, they're computing that he's doing one of two things. He's either marketing the bejeebers and spending a whole lot of bunch of money, and he's figured out how to process more new patients. Because most people think the only way to grow a business, the chiropractic business, is I got to see more new patients. So my question is are you seeing a large host more of new patients than you were?
So compared to when we started the hard reset, yes, but most of that's because we were getting more referrals.
Right.
And then when we were going out to screenings or we were doing outside lectures, they were more effective because our heart was in the right place.
And,
so we didn't do marketing at all.
And do you do marketing now? You do screenings and marketing events?
We've mostly gone away from COVID kind of hit, so we started looking at the internet more. So that we've been doing that, but we still rely mostly, on those referrals.
Internal referrals.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the keys to the growth also is that, we held our patients accountable that if they chose to start care, that they were going to stay on track. I think we had gotten a little bit wishy-washy in letting patients kind of guide their own care. And so, if they're prescribed care, they're going to stay on the prescribed care because that's what's best for them.
And when you take that mindset or take that concept of what's best for the patient, the confrontation issue goes bye-bye.
Yeah, I used to, my lip would tremble if I was in any type of confrontation. And so I had to recalibrate my thought that confrontation isn't confrontation. It's getting on the same page with them to understand them so that we can work on a solution together. And once I truly, authentically believe that, then it's not confrontation anymore.
I said there was two reasons why people are computing while they're listening to this show today. They either think they got to see a lot more new patients, or two, you've gone down the road of you've added some kind of component to your practice. In other words, you've brought in massage therapy, you're doing acupuncture, or you're doing a functional therapy, or you're doing knee compression, you're doing some kind of spinal decompression. Is that the road that you had to take?
No, actually, I think the only thing that we added in as a therapy was putting ice on them just so that they would rest before they head out to their car. And that is a zero revenue thing for us. So.
And why would you do that?
Well, first of all, obviously it's best for patients to rest before they get out into their busy day, but also when they're in close proximity to each other, they get to talk to each other and brag about their progress.
And where would you learn to do that?
I don't know. Is maybe this thing called AMC?
Maybe something called a system.
Yes.
Of understanding that there's value, putting value to the care that they're getting, making them take time. Number one, icing is good for the patient, right? It is good to let the treatment set in for a few minutes before they go run out and get in the traffic and the stress. So yeah, it is good for the patient. But then when you're understanding you're operating with the right mindset, then there's somebody conducting and having constructive conversation rather than talking about the football game tonight or talking about the weather or how they're dressed. They're constructively talking about things that either are going to help the patient
Right.
get better care, better results, or possibly the opportunity for referrals. Again, folks, there's an art to it, right? It's not tied up in scripts and procedures. There's a process and there's a reason why behind everything. There's not a leaf you could turn over, that there's not a reason we're turning over that leaf. And you said something, I think I'll wrap it up right here. There's so much to this system. You have to get past, it's not, when you say system, it makes you think procedural. There's so much to this components, and it really is like 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle, and if those of you that ever put a jigsaw puzzle together around my house, traditionally around Thanksgiving, it's kind of a tradition, it has been for years, that in our family, somebody's going to start a giant jigsaw puzzle before, 2 days before I mean, there's people in my family that are cooking for Thanksgiving 2 days before. The meal lasts for 20 minutes, but they cook for it for 3 days. So sometime during the holidays, Thanksgiving, and then it goes into the Christmas time around the family, and there's this ginormous jigsaw puzzle that everyone just walks by. They're basting the turkey, or they're doing whatever, making the pie or whatever. Everybody just takes, every once in a while they stop and put a piece together, and they put a piece together. And by the time the Christmas or New Year's comes around, we have finished this puzzle. But the last time we put a 2,000-piece puzzle together, it was put together 5 years ago. They got it out of the closet, and somewhere along the way, 3 pieces, the kids lost 3 pieces down in the cushions of the couch, 4 pieces got vacuumed up, 2 pieces got thrown away with the trash, and all of a sudden there's 2,000 pieces all put together. The corners will come together quickly, right? The corners always come together quick, but you're missing about 15 pieces to a 2,000-piece jigsaw puzzle. Is the picture complete?
No way.
No. Is it as effective? No.
It's distracting.
It's distracting, right? It's not effective. It's distracting. And where do your eyes go to?
The missing pieces.
The missing pieces. So folks, that's what we're talking about when we say it's not surface. It's very, very deep. There's a lot of pieces to come together, but they fit together. And that's the key. And I think the biggest piece to your puzzle was conceptually,
right,
making it about what's best for the patient and not what's best for you.
For sure.
And that changed everything for you.
Absolutely.
18-year journey, and it came down to that.
Yeah.
But I couldn't have convinced you of that in 2005. There wasn't enough money in the world that I could have convinced you of that. You had to experience it. You had to come to what we call it a hard reset. It's also can be determined as a line in the sand moment.
Yeah.
That you just made that shift.
Well, that puzzle that you were just describing, it just made me realize that before the hard reset, you know how sometimes you put together puzzles they're almost in islands, right? You do different sectors, right? Mm-hmm. But you don't know how they're all going to fit together. I had all these sectors laid out, but didn't know how to put them together until I had those concepts. And I think also training centers help people to put, that's how that fits with this. So it really starts putting the puzzle sectors together as well.
But it all starts with an attitude.
For sure.
That you were willing to submit to that process way back in Dallas. Your attitude was, enough's enough. I'm done. Let's figure this out, right? And
Amen.
That was an attitude, right?
Amen.
Dr. Tim, I really do appreciate you joining me for this show. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Dr. McMurtry's had you on the show before, isn't that right?
Yeah, we've been talking about training centers a bit, and just since I've benefited from them so much, I want to make sure that everybody's taking advantage of them the way that they can really, truly grow their practice and serve their community better.
I hope you defended me because I'm sure McMurtry didn't say a lot of nice things about me when I wasn't around.
Oh, I stay out of that.
No, don't stay out of it. Defend him. I'll keep for a loop here and there. All right. Well, folks, listen, hopefully you got something out of today. I mean, that's some good stuff. And you don't have to do that journey. You don't have to take 7 years to come to a hard reset. You could do it today. And whether you're an aligned member or you're out there, scrambling around on your own island with all the sectors of your puzzle floating and you can't figure out a way to put it together, there's a family waiting, right? And a guy like Dr. Tim Peterson will come right along beside you and say, better yet, why don't you I'll open my doors and come watch, come see it. This family is here to transform and help chiropractors, plain and simple. So AMC members, utilize the certified training centers. Guests who are just listening to the show, check us out. Pick up the phone, go to amcfamily.com. Real simple. Go to amcfamily.com. There's a button right there that says book a consultation. What does that mean? Let's have an authentic conversation as to about maybe where you are and what's holding you back. And maybe it's time for you to go through what's called a hard reset. You will be glad you did. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. We are coming in close to 2024, folks. That's a fantastic time of the year, isn't it, Dr. Tim, to visit certified training centers. So hopefully the schedule books up so solid that you got them on a waiting list. But right there, it's fantastic times to sharpen the tools to get ready for the new year, because a new year is coming. Whether you prepare for it is going to determine a lot about how does it springboard or do we stay on the same plateau. So I encourage you, certified training centers. So you're going to have to make that kind of commitment. And other than that, I can't do anything else. We can bring you to the spring-fed pond, but you got to drink it. So with that, I love you. I appreciate you. We will talk to you next week. And with that, have a great week. God bless.
Follow our show. You can share it with friends, of course. And we'd love for you to contact us at mailbag@amcfamily.com. In addition, you're always invited to attend or join us at a summit. Of course, registration is required. And we would love for you to check out the loads of free content we provide to social media every single week. Until next time.